Evil Dead Burn. Well, it's gory. After the loss of her husband, a woman seeks solace with her in-laws. As one by one they transform into deadites, she comes to discover that the vows she took in life survive even in death. So this takes place after Evil Dead Rise, as we are once more shown the lake that featured that ever so iconic title reveal. Now, after some gruesome happenings, we then get to meet several of the characters that we're going to be following for the rest of the film. And just like with Evil Dead Rise, this outing focuses heavily on family, but throws in then a whole lot of other baggage that adds to the torment. This is directed by Sébastien Vanicek, and he's the dude that made the creepier of 2023's spider-themed horrors, Infested. Now, he brings a lot of that same type of claustrophobic atmosphere to this entry in the franchise, using sequestered locations and minimal outside exposure to instill some dread and foreboding. Now, if you're looking for gore, this film has got some nasty visuals that are not only gross, but they're played out long enough to create some irps in the throat just thanks to the unflinching eye of the camera. Well, if you do... Well, several of the nasties, they were revealed in the trailer, which I think is unfortunate. But there are others that didn't get shown that could make you vomit just a tiny bit, just thanks to how visceral and palpable the effects are. There's an unusual amount of blood going into other people's mouths. The methods of delivery, they're mostly unique and then nauseating. There are also some traumatic visuals where wounds come into play. And the camera doesn't always show the full sequence of violence, blinking to then show a reaction to that action before returning to let us see the aftermath. But there are many instances where full-blown savagery is showcased, and it can be disturbing, or at least uncomfortable. And then to complement the makeup and the effects, the camera work showcased here is spectacular. There are your typical Dutch angles where everything's kind of off-center, but they're hardly employed. Instead, having the shots favor some top-down orientations and then rotating movements that keep the subject in the same orientation while the rest of the environment spins around. And that may not sound impressive. It's not, though, the camera spinning around the room as the focal point just stands in the center. I mean, it's way more complex than that, which then makes it effective in creating immersion within these scenes. And there's also a one-shot that's rather lengthy. It follows a couple of different subjects as chaos erupts all around. I appreciate how the focus doesn't become distracted by having the camera jerk all around to capture every single thing that's going on in this house of horrors. Instead, it keeps this character as the center of attention. And this not only allows for then some more intimate emotional responses, but it also doesn't allow us to see when something might fall into the frame or on top of a character. Thanks to the deadites not needing to adhere to the laws of physics, they really could come from any direction, which keeps the energy high. Now, for fans of horror, not only Evil Dead films, but just horrors in general, there are Easter eggs scattered throughout that range from blatantly obvious, like a nod to The Shining, to then more obscure and hidden references. Now, these don't add anything to the storytelling, but they are fun if you catch them. Now, for as much as I did enjoy the bloodshed and the brutality of the events, the movie itself is just meh. So much of that comes down to the writing and the presentation of the characters. There's very little, and I mean minuscule, development on the entire cast. And we don't need to know every background detail on them, but I found it curious for the elements that we do know about each. Just about every single character, they become wildly unlikable, some downright despicable, and that's before any of the possessions take place. The family's dysfunctional, to say the least. Mom and dad are coddling and then standoffish all at once. They certainly give off the vibe that they hate any outsiders. One son is just a waste of oxygen in space, and then the younger son is scared and timid to a fault, choosing inaction so many times over any sort of support, even when it could be a life and death situation. And then we have the outsiders to the family, the wife who just lost her husband, and the girlfriend who doesn't seem to be well received into the family either. And the dynamic, it's off and nearly impossible to engage with because there's no rationale for the sentiments and the behaviors that we see displayed. And then there's a very heavy focus on abuse within the story, emotional, mental, and physical. And while that is a useful way to immediately make a character a villain, that behavior becomes gratuitous when it's shown over and over and over again. And then to add insult to injury, the abused character can't even escape her tormentor. Yeah, I know that is a lot of the point within the lore, too, that reading from the Necronomicon brings about never-ending torture and suffering. But the cruelty here overshadows the gruesomeness of the film in favor of constantly inflicting abuse on a specific character. And there's basically no reprieve either. So when that focus is combined with a handful of unlikable characters, it's difficult to become invested in any of their survivals. This also removes so much of any tension or dread. I mean, yeah, the visuals are nasty and they're squirm-inducing, but they didn't carry any meaningful weight. It was just gross to be gross, and that's a forgettable method of storytelling. At no point within the movie was I on the edge of my seat with anything that could resemble trepidation, even apprehension. The characters were nobodies, zero attachment or connection other than many of them also being loathsome shites in addition to being nobodies. And then for me, one final nail on the coffin is that the story is presented in a somewhat choppy manner. I think in an effort to mimic how Evil Dead Rise's story progression was carried out, the filmmakers here copied many of the same storytelling elements, but then in a convoluted and non-flowing way. There is some new addition to the lore that I found a bit intriguing, but it also introduces a sort of overpowered type of MacGuffin within the process, so it's going to be interesting to see where this leads for Evil Dead Wrath. Overall, Evil Dead Burn displays brutal gore in the brashest ways, delivering stomach-churning visuals that linger longer than is comfortable. The camera work is impressive and enveloping, creating unbroken sequences that amp up the energy. But unfortunately, with confused story progressions, a Legion-sized lack of tension and dread, unlikable characters with no development, and an ineffective commentary despite a heavy focus on spousal abuse, all culminate in a gross movie to watch, which can be fun, but loses out in all the other areas that create a memorable and lasting story full of fear or terror. I'd much rather watch Evil Dead Rise on repeat than this again. At least there's a story amidst all that carnage. There's no sex or nudity, a lot of profanity, obviously then a ton of violence. I give Evil Dead Burn 2.5 out of 5 couches. And if you're looking for gore, you're going to have fun. All right, are there any horrors that get under your skin? Now, I've seen a few that are both nasty and make me question humanity, so if you do have any recommendations, let me know in the comments below. And no, I'm not going to be watching a Serbian film. There is a limit to things, you know. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.